Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, each one a tiny world in Jedediah's simple life. His ranch, nestled in a valley where the wind whispered secrets through the tall grass, was all he needed. Or so he thought. He'd spent years building it, stone by stone, chore by chore, until it reflected the quiet peace he craved. But a man gets lonely, even in paradise. Jedediah yearned for a partner, someone to share the sunsets and the long winter nights. He didn't want a firecracker, a city woman with fancy ideas. He wanted simplicity, a woman who understood the land, who appreciated the rhythm of the seasons. A soft-spoken bride to match the quiet routines of ranch life. He placed an advertisement in a distant newspaper, a small, unassuming notice seeking a wife. He wasn't particular about looks, just character. Honesty, kindness, a willingness to work. He received a few replies, but none felt right. Then came a letter, penned in delicate script, from a woman named Sarah. Her words were simple, her desires modest. She spoke of a longing for a peaceful life, a love of the outdoors, and a respect for hard work. Jedediah felt a stirring in his heart, a flicker of hope he hadn't expected. They corresponded for weeks, sharing stories and dreams, until Jedediah was convinced she was the one. He sent her money for the train fare, his heart pounding with anticipation. He was ready to build a life with Sarah, a life filled with simple joys and quiet companionship. He just hoped she would feel the same way about him and his ranch. The train whistle echoed through the valley, a long, mournful sound that made Jedediah's heart skip a beat. He smoothed down his best shirt, the one he only wore to town or special occasions, and adjusted his hat. He wanted to make a good impression, to show Sarah that he was a man of his word. As the train pulled into the small station, Jedediah scanned the faces of the passengers disembarking. He was looking for a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, just as she described herself in her letters. Then he saw her. She stood a little apart from the other travelers, her simple brown dress blending in with the dusty landscape. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, the color of warm honey, met his with a shy smile. She carried a small valise and a worn carpetbag, her possessions seemingly as modest as her demeanor. Jedediah felt a wave of relief wash over him. She was even lovelier than he had imagined. He strode towards her, his hand outstretched. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice a little rough with emotion. "Jedediah," she replied, her voice soft and melodic. She took his hand, her touch surprisingly firm. "It's so good to finally meet you." He took her valise and carpetbag, surprised by their weight. "Welcome to my ranch," he said, leading her towards his wagon. "I hope you'll be happy here." As they rode back to the ranch, Sarah took in the scenery with wide, appreciative eyes. She asked questions about the land, the animals, and the challenges of ranch life. Jedediah found himself relaxing, his initial nervousness fading away. She seemed genuinely interested in his world, eager to learn and to contribute. He felt, more than ever, that he had made the right choice. Life with Sarah settled into a comfortable rhythm. She rose before dawn, helping Jedediah with the chores without complaint. She cooked simple, hearty meals that filled his belly and warmed his soul. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, sharing stories in comfortable silences. Jedediah felt a contentment he hadn't known was possible. He was building the simple, peaceful life he had always dreamed of, with Sarah by his side. She was a quick learner, eager to master the skills of ranch life. She tended the chickens, milked the cows, and even helped with the fencing. Jedediah was impressed by her willingness to work and her quiet determination. She seemed to fit perfectly into his world, as if she had always belonged there. The first few weeks were idyllic. Jedediah found himself falling more in love with Sarah each day. Her gentle nature, her kind heart, and her unassuming beauty filled a void in his life he hadn't realized existed. He often caught himself just watching her, marveling at his good fortune. He had found his soft-spoken bride, his partner in life, and he was grateful for every moment they shared. He finally had someone to share his life with, and it was perfect. Or so he thought. The secrets she carried were soon to emerge. And the simple life he had always wanted was about to become very complicated. The first flicker of unease came during a cattle drive. Jedediah had always prided himself on his horsemanship, but Sarah handled her mount with an almost unnerving skill. She moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, guiding the herd with a subtle authority that belied her gentle demeanor. It was as if she had spent years in the saddle, training horses for war, not just herding cattle on a peaceful ranch. Jedediah chalked it up to natural talent, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Then there was the scar. One sweltering afternoon, While Sarah was washing up at the pump, her dress slipped, revealing a long, jagged scar on her left shoulder. When Jedediah asked about it, she paled slightly and said it was from a fall she'd taken as a child, tumbling from a tree. But the scar looked old, and its shape was inconsistent with a fall. It looked more like a wound from a blade, a long-ago battle scar. Jedediah pushed the thought aside, telling himself he was being foolish. Another incident occurred on Sunday. The church bells began to toll, calling the townsfolk to worship. Sarah visibly flinched, her hands trembling slightly. She refused to go to church, claiming a headache. Jedediah didn't press her, but he couldn't help but wonder why the sound of church bells seemed to frighten her. Small inconsistencies began to surface, each one a subtle crack in the facade of the simple, gentle woman he thought he knew. These weren't the actions of someone who had wanted a peaceful life. These were the actions of someone with a secret, someone with a past she was trying to hide. It wasn't just Jedediah who was starting to notice things. The close-knit community of ranchers and farmers had a way of knowing everything that went on, and Sarah's arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. At first, the neighbors had been welcoming, offering pies and friendly greetings. But as time went on, Jedediah sensed a shift in their demeanor. During a trip to town for supplies, Martha, the baker's wife, gave Jedediah an odd look. "She's a quiet one, you're Sarah," Martha said, her voice tight. "Doesn't say much." Jedediah shrugged it off, explaining that Sarah was simply shy. But Martha's words lingered in his mind. Later that day, at the general store, Old Man Hemlock, known for his tall tales and sharp eyes, cornered Jedediah. "That wife of yours," he rasped, his voice low. "She got a strange look about her. Like she's seen things, bad things." Jedediah bristled, defending Sarah. "She's had a hard life, that's all." Hemlock just chuckled, a dry, unsettling sound. "Maybe. Or maybe she is hard life." The questions, the whispers, the sidelong glances, they all started to get to Jedediah. He found himself becoming defensive, snapping at anyone who dared to question Sarah. He wanted to believe in her, to trust her, but the community's unease only amplified his own growing doubts. He started to feel isolated, caught between his loyalty to Sarah and the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. He realized then that he had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The old man arrived on a horse as weathered as himself, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and time. He rode slowly, deliberately, as if he carried a burden heavier than his years. Jedediah watched him approach, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He knew somehow that this visit would change everything. The old man dismounted stiffly, his joints creaking in protest. He didn't offer a greeting, didn't waste time on pleasantries. He simply fixed Jedediah with a piercing gaze, his eyes the color of faded denim. "You're Jedediah, right? Married to that woman?" "Sarah." Jedediah nodded cautiously. "That's right. And you are?" The old man ignored the question. He reached inside his worn coat and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, its edges frayed and yellowed. "I think you should see this," he said, handing it to Jedediah. Jedediah unfolded the clipping, his heart pounding in his chest. The headline was faded but still legible: "Local woman vanishes without a trace." The article described the disappearance of a young woman from a town hundreds of miles away. Her name was Eliza. Jedediah frowned, confused. "What's this got to do with anything?" he asked. The old man pointed to a grainy photograph accompanying the article. "Look closer," he said, his voice grim. Jedediah squinted at the photograph, his breath catching in his throat. The woman in the picture, she looked remarkably like Sarah. The same honey-colored eyes, the same delicate features. But it couldn't be, could it? He glanced back at the old man, his mind reeling. The world, his simple world, was about to tilt on its axis. The old man, seeing the shock in Jedediah's eyes, pulled out two more clippings, each as faded and unsettling as the first. One detailed the disappearance of a woman named Clara from a small town in Kansas. The other spoke of a missing woman named Rose, last seen in Colorado. In each photograph, the same honey-colored eyes stared back at Jedediah, the same delicate features, subtly altered but undeniably the same woman he knew as Sarah. 3 women, the old man said, his voice gravelly. All vanished. All left behind husbands who were heartbroken and bewildered. And each time, she changed her name, moved on, started a new life. Jedediah stared at the clippings, his mind struggling to comprehend the information. It was impossible, unbelievable. Sarah, his gentle, loving Sarah, couldn't be connected to these disappearances. This is a mistake," he stammered. "It can't be her." "I thought so too, at first," the old man said. But I knew Eliza. We were neighbors. I saw her photograph in your advertisement. I had to come. He explained that each woman had married a man seeking a quiet life, a simple existence. Each disappearance occurred after a period of apparent happiness, with no signs of trouble. The husbands were left with nothing but unanswered questions and shattered hearts. The old man paused, his gaze piercing. I don't know what she is, Jedediah, he said. Whether she's a victim, running from something terrible, or something else entirely. But I know this. You need to be careful. He then turned and rode off, leaving Jedediah alone with the weight of the revelations and the growing fear that he had invited something dangerous into his life. Jedediah spent a sleepless night wrestling with the old man's revelations. The newspaper clippings lay scattered on the table, their faded ink mocking his naivete. He kept looking at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in their bed, her face serene and untroubled. How could this woman, who seemed so gentle and kind, be connected to such unsettling disappearances? He replayed every moment he'd spent with her, searching for clues, for signs he had missed. He remembered her reluctance to talk about her past, her vague answers to his questions. He recalled the way she flinched at the sound of church bells, the skill with which she handled a horse. Each detail, once innocent, now seemed sinister. He wanted to believe she was a victim, running from a dangerous past. Perhaps she had been forced to change her identity, to flee from abusive situations. But the old man's words echoed in his mind, or something else entirely. What if Sarah wasn't running from something, but towards something? What if she was the danger? He looked at her again, his heart aching with confusion and fear. He loved her, or at least, he loved the woman he thought she was. But now, he didn't know who she was anymore. He was torn between his desire to trust her and his growing suspicion that he was living with a stranger, a woman with a dark and mysterious past. He knew he couldn't ignore the evidence, couldn't pretend that everything was normal. He had to find out the truth, even if it meant losing the woman he loved. He had to protect himself, and perhaps, the community around him. He just didn't know how. The next morning, Jedediah watched Sarah closely, searching for any sign of deception. She seemed her usual self, preparing breakfast with a quiet efficiency. But her eyes, he noticed, held a shadow of sadness, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. Later that day, a storm rolled in, black clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind howled, rattling the windows and shaking the foundations of the house. Sarah became visibly agitated. She paced restlessly, her hands fidgeting, her eyes darting nervously around the room. A sudden clap of thunder shook the house, and Sarah cried out, clutching her chest. Jedediah rushed to her side, concern overriding his suspicions. Sarah, what's wrong? He asked, his voice filled with genuine worry. She trembled in his arms, her face pale. The storm, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. It reminds me of something terrible. Jedediah held her close, trying to comfort her. He felt a surge of compassion, a renewed belief in her innocence. Perhaps she was running from a trauma, a past that haunted her still. But then, he noticed something else. As she clung to him, her grip was surprisingly strong, almost desperate. And in her eyes, he saw not just fear, but a flicker of calculation. Was she truly afraid, or was this just another performance, another way to manipulate him? He didn't know what to believe anymore. This moment of apparent vulnerability had only deepened the mystery, leaving him more confused and uncertain than ever. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Jedediah began to secretly investigate Sarah. He started small, rifling through her belongings when she was out tending the chickens. He felt a pang of guilt, violating her privacy, but the fear of what she might be hiding outweighed his conscience. In her valise, he found neatly folded clothes, a few personal items, and a small, locked wooden box. He tried to pry it open, but it was too sturdy. Frustrated, he moved on, searching through her carpetbag. Beneath a layer of old letters, he discovered a small notebook, its pages filled with delicate script. The entries were cryptic, filled with coded messages and fragmented thoughts. Jedediah recognized dates and locations that corresponded to the towns where the missing women had disappeared. There were references to the plan, the escape, and the new life. He couldn't decipher the full meaning, but the implications were chilling. He also found a map, carefully drawn, depicting escape routes through the surrounding territory, marked with secret symbols. One symbol, a small circle with a cross inside, was circled repeatedly near a remote mountain pass. The discoveries sent a shiver down his spine. He quickly replaced the items, trying to leave no trace of his intrusion. He now knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Sarah was hiding something dangerous, something that threatened everything he held dear. The question was, what was her plan, and was he a part of it? He knew he had to confront her, but he needed to be careful. He didn't want to provoke her, not until he knew exactly what he was dealing with. That evening, Jedediah decided to confront Sarah. He waited until after supper, when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He took a deep breath, trying to control his trembling hands. "Sarah," he began, his voice strained, "there's something I need to ask you." She turned to him, her honey-colored eyes questioning. "What is it, Jedediah?" He hesitated, then plunged in. "Have you ever been known as Eliza? Or Clara? Or Rose?" Sarah's face paled, but her expression remained carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jedediah pulled out the newspaper clippings, his hand shaking. "These women, they look just like you. They all disappeared. Can you explain this?" Sarah took the clippings, her fingers trembling. She studied them for a long moment, then looked up at Jedediah, her eyes filled with a carefully crafted sadness. "Those poor women," she said, her voice laced with sorrow. "It's terrible what happened to them. But Sarah," Jedediah pressed, "is that you in the pictures?" She avoided his gaze, looking out at the setting sun. "I've had a difficult life, Jedediah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've made mistakes. I've done things I'm not proud of. But I'm not those women." Her evasiveness only fueled his suspicions. "What about the scar on your shoulder? Where did you really get it?" Sarah sighed, a long, theatrical sound. "I told you, it was from a fall." Jedediah knew she was lying. He could feel it in his gut. "Sarah," he pleaded, "please, just tell me the truth. I deserve to know." She stood up, her face hardening. "I've told you all I'm going to tell you," she said, her voice cold. "If you can't trust me, then maybe this isn't going to work." With that, she turned and walked into the house, leaving Jedediah alone on the porch, his heart filled with a chilling certainty. He had married a woman he didn't know, a woman who was hiding a dangerous secret. The next morning, Jedediah found himself unusually clumsy, his mind still reeling from the previous night's confrontation. He was fixing a loose plank on the barn roof when his foot slipped. He lost his balance, grabbing desperately for something to hold on to, but there was nothing there. He plunged to the ground, landing hard on his shoulder. Sarah rushed out of the house, her face etched with concern. "Jedediah, are you all right?" she cried, kneeling beside him. He groaned, his shoulder throbbing with pain. "I think I broke something," he mumbled. Sarah helped him to his feet, her touch surprisingly gentle. She led him into the house and carefully examined his shoulder. "It's dislocated," she said, her voice calm and efficient. "I can fix it." Jedediah hesitated. He didn't trust her, not anymore. But he was in too much pain to argue. He allowed her to guide him to a chair. She moved with a practiced ease, as if she had done this many times before. With a swift, precise movement, she popped his shoulder back into place. The pain was excruciating, but Jedediah couldn't help but notice her skill, her knowledge. Where had she learned to do that? Was this just another example of her hidden talents, or was something more sinister at play? Had this accident been orchestrated, a way for her to incapacitate him? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He couldn't be sure if she caused it or saved him. He realized he was at her mercy, trapped in his own home with a woman he no longer knew, a woman who might be his savior or his executioner. The stakes had just been raised, and he knew he needed to be more careful than ever. Confined to the house with his injured shoulder, Jedediah had ample time to observe Sarah. He noticed her humming unfamiliar tunes as she worked, melodies that sounded vaguely European, perhaps German or Austrian. One day, while she was tending to the herb garden, he overheard her speaking in a language he didn't recognize. It was lilting and melodic, nothing like he'd ever heard before. Later, he found her sketching in her notebook. He glanced over her shoulder and saw that she was drawing intricate botanical illustrations, depicting rare and exotic plants. He had never known her to have any artistic talent, let alone such detailed knowledge of botany. He remembered the name Eliza from the newspaper clipping. He recalled the old man mentioning that Eliza had been a talented herbalist, known for her knowledge of medicinal plants. Could Sarah, as Eliza, have been an herbalist? Was this her hidden talent, the skill that connected her to her past identity? That night, as Sarah slept, Jedediah crept to her valise and retrieved the locked wooden box. Driven by a desperate need to know the truth, he used a small knife to carefully pick the lock. Inside, he found a collection of dried herbs, a small silver locket, and a faded photograph of a woman in a military uniform. The woman in the photograph had the same honey-colored eyes as Sarah, but her expression was steely and resolute. She looked like a soldier, a warrior. This new discovery solidified Jedediah's fear. Sarah wasn't just running from something. She was something. She was a chameleon, adapting to new lives, hiding behind different identities, each with its own set of hidden skills and secrets. And he was caught in her web. Armed with the photograph and the coded notebook, Jedediah knew he had to confront Sarah again, this time with undeniable proof. He waited for her in the kitchen, the evidence spread out on the table. When she entered, her face betrayed a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by a practiced calm. "We need to talk," Jedediah said, his voice firm. Sarah glanced at the items on the table, her eyes widening slightly. "I see you've been busy," she said, her voice dangerously low. Jedediah held up the photograph. "Who is this woman, Sarah? And why do you have her picture?" Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping. "That was me," she said, her voice resigned. "A long time ago, in another life." She revealed that she had been a soldier in a foreign army, fighting for a cause she no longer believed in. She had witnessed terrible things, committed acts she deeply regretted. After the war, she had deserted, changing her name and fleeing to America, seeking a peaceful life, a way to atone for her past. The disappearances, she explained, were not her doing. She had been running from someone, from powerful enemies who wanted her dead. Each time they found her, she had to flee again, leaving behind everything she had built, including the men she had grown to love. She had hoped that by coming to Jedediah's ranch, she could finally find safety, finally escape her past. But now, it seemed, her enemies had found her once again. She wasn't the danger. The danger was chasing her. She had to protect Jedediah, or she had to run. Just then, a gunshot shattered the silence. A bullet pierced the window, narrowly missing Jedediah. He grabbed Sarah, pulling her to the floor. "They're here," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Jedediah grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to protect himself, his home, and Sarah, if he could trust her. He peered out the window, spotting two figures on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. They were armed and dangerous. "We have to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "They know this ranch. They'll surround us." Jedediah hesitated. He didn't want to run. This was his home, his land. But he knew Sarah was right. They were outgunned and outnumbered. "There's a storm cellar beneath the barn," he said. "We can hide there." They crawled through the house, avoiding the windows, and made their way to the barn. As they reached the cellar door, another shot rang out, hitting the door frame. Sarah pushed Jedediah inside, then turned to face their attackers, pulling a pistol from her boot. "Go," she yelled. "I'll hold them off." Jedediah hesitated, torn between his desire to protect her and his instinct for self-preservation. He looked into her eyes, searching for the truth. Was she sacrificing herself for him? Or was this just another act, another manipulation? He couldn't be sure. But he knew he had to make a decision, and he had to make it now. Would he trust the woman he loved, the woman who claimed to be running from danger? Or would he protect himself and his community, even if it meant abandoning her to her fate? The choice was his, and his alone. Or, Jedediah made his decision. He couldn't risk his community. He retreated into the storm cellar, closing the door behind him, the sounds of gunfire echoing above. He waited, listening to the sounds of the struggle, his heart pounding with guilt and fear. The shooting eventually stopped. Silence descended, broken only by the wind whispering through the tall grass. Jedediah waited, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands, unsure what to expect. Hours passed. Finally, as dawn broke, he cautiously opened the cellar door. The ranch was deserted. Sarah was gone. He searched the property, finding signs of a struggle, but no bodies. Sarah had vanished, leaving behind no trace but the memories of her presence and the lingering questions that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Had she escaped her enemies? Had they captured her? Or had she simply moved on, as she had done before, leaving behind another broken heart and a trail of unanswered questions? Jedediah would never know. He was left with his simple life, the life he had always wanted. But it was no longer simple. It was tainted by doubt, by regret, and by the knowledge that he had once held a dangerous secret in his arms. He had chosen to protect his community, but in doing so, he had lost something precious, something he could never replace. He had wanted simplicity, but he had found something far more complicated, something that would forever change the way he looked at the world. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the secrets of the valley, secrets that Jedediah would carry with him to his grave. The answer to whether she was a victim or the danger remained elusive.